Let's look at a couple of simple ways to make lists more interactive for the learner. I'm starting with checkboxes that the learner clicks on to reveal the information. After inserting the first checkbox, I edit the checkbox state and update the hover state to a clear background. I set the color and look that I want. I then add a trigger to the checkbox, so that when the learner clicks on the checkbox, a layer is shown. I do not stipulate which layer at this time, because I haven't created the layers. To reduce the amount of repetitive work I have to do, I set up the first checkbox with the triggers and animations that I want for all checkboxes in the list. I then copy and paste the checkbox, one for each item on my list. I now have 5 checkboxes with the triggers and animations I want. I use the format functions to correctly align and set out my checkboxes. Now I'm adding the title. I now create my first text box for the first dot point on my list. Each dot point requires its own text box. To make the process easier, I copy and paste the first text box, replicating enough text boxes for each checkbox. If you wanted to animate the entrance of these text boxes, you would do this now. I then use the Format tab functions to line up the text information with the relevant checkboxes. Now I'm updating the text boxes with the correct information from my list. I set out my slide so it looks like I want, making sure the checkboxes and text boxes are correctly aligned. For this instance, I'm adding a character to make the slide more visually interesting and humanizing the content. I move the elements around until I get the look I want. Always keep the checkboxes and text boxes aligned. Once I'm happy with the way the slide is set out, I create the first layer. I name the layer number 1, which will align with checkbox 1. In the Slide Properties panel, I make sure the option to hide other slide layers is deselected. I then duplicate the first layer 4 times, so I have one layer for each text box. So I don't get confused, I rename each layer to match the checkbox numbers. I now cut each text box and paste it into the corresponding layer. Articulate Storyline will paste the text box in the exact location on the screen, so there is no guesswork to align everything. I now update the triggers we created earlier with the relevant layers we want to display when the checkboxes are selected. Let's test our work. It looks great. Now we will present the same information using interactive number icons. Select the shape and format of the icon you want to use. I've labeled this icon number 1. I now create a new state for the icon. This will be what the icon looks like once it has been selected by the learner. I then create a trigger to make the icon change to the new state when the learner clicks on the icon. I also create a trigger to show a layer when the icon is selected. This trigger is unassigned until we create our layers. I am adding an animation to the icon. Now that the icon is set up with the animations and triggers I want, I duplicate it 4 times, so I now have 5 icons for the 5 items on my list. I use the formatting functions to align and set out my icons. I relabel my new icons. I now create the first layer. I call it number 1 to correspond with the icon number. Unlike the other example, the slide layer properties should state that we hide the other layers, but the base layer remains visible. I add a text box with the list information. You can add audio, animations, images, markers, or even videos to these layers. Once the layer is set up, I duplicate a layer for each icon. Because I'm duplicating the first layer, the information will present consistently as the learner clicks through the list. I update the text box on each layer with the new list item information. Back on the base layer, I then update the icon triggers with the layers to be displayed. Let's have a look. That is much better than reading a dot point list.